Um, I was compelled and impelled to go back to basics, to go and talk about the foundations of what we come here to learn every Sunday or every week when we come to the center. Who is new to Spiritism? Who is coming here for the first time? I'm happy to see that you have been coming here for a long time. Anyone has been here for just 1 year or less? Okay, so a few folks who are relatively new, and as David said, we are all students of Spiritism. I guess even if we have been coming here for a long time, we still learn every day. Every time I read the Spirit's book or any of Kardec's works, I learn. And I've started reading those books a long time ago, when I was just a teenager. It's probably 5 years ago. But you change, right? As you go through life, your perspective change, your experiences shape you, and when you go back and read the works again, they have a different meaning, because now you have more reference points, you have more experiences to relate to what's being said. So they mean more things to you as you go back in life. And as you grow older, and I guess I'm having to come to grips with the fact that I'm growing older, and you start to admire simplicity, right? The world is getting so complex, and yet I start to admire, the simple things, and how simple things actually show us the solution. And you start pondering around, again, where is the world going? Why? Is this out of control? Is the world crazy? And it isn't, right? Everything has a reason, everything is in order, right? And I feel very relieved when I see some of the most advanced technologies being used to solve our most fundamental problems. Again, I could go on, and that could be probably another lecture, but just yesterday I was having a conversation with my kids, and I was sharing with them something that I've come across. I don't know how many of you know Kiva. Does anyone know Kiva? Okay, there's a guy out there who knows Kiva. So Kiva is a relatively new company, I believe from California, that have come up with this concept of being a technology intermediary for microloans. For those of you who have not seen microloans is a concept where any person, any one of us, can lend small quantities of money, a small amount of money, to people all over the world, mostly in very, very poor areas of the world, like Africa, Southeast Asia, to help them do things that they need to do and actually grow small businesses. Normally those people are trying to start a small business. Maybe they are carpenters, maybe they are just distributing food, for example, and they don't need a lot of money. They need a few $100s to get started. And for them it was nearly impossible to get those few $100s because they don't have credit, they don't have income, right? Where are they going to get, who's going to lend them money? So today you go online and you lend $25 to as many people as you want, and by a lot of people lending those $25, they get the money that they need to do what they need to do. And the astounding thing that you learn from this is that this has been going for a while, and the repayment rate is 98%, which is amazing. So 98% of those loans get repaid on time, which means these people are really helping themselves, and anyone in the world today can go online and you can help people anywhere in the world without having to come up with large sums of money. It's a very democratic way of helping people, as we say, fish, right? Instead of giving them the fish, you teach them, or you allow them to get on their feet by themselves. So this is just one example that was very present, because I had this conversation with my family yesterday, because they were unaware. And then you start to realize how modern technology can really help us solve really difficult problems that we've had for a long time. It may be the way to solving those problems. Why I'm saying this? Because again, sometimes we lose sight and perspective of why are things going in the direction they are going. Well, I do believe, and being Spiritist, we do believe that things have a purpose and there's a plan, and this is all part of the plan that leads us to, you know, becoming a better world and becoming a better society. So it reminded me of, again, the foundations of what I've learned as a Spiritist and how we can always relate to those foundations when we look at anything that's happening, you know, in life. So I decided to, again, walk us through, hopefully, a quick recap of the Spiritist principles. So the goal here today is to present and hopefully have more of a conversation. So I'm going to stop throughout the presentation if anyone has any major burning question. For us to, again, be reminded of what the Spiritist doctrine is about. We have these 34 principles can be found in the introduction that Kardec makes in the Spiritist book. I found it to be, again, very useful. Sometimes it's hard to explain what the doctrine is, right? When we meet someone new and you're trying to explain all the different facets of Spiritism, it can get a little overwhelming because you can talk about, you know, so many different aspects, and there are different aspects. So I found it useful for me to go back and reframe it in my own head, and I hope you'll find it useful too. So the first thing we want to do is, again, remember what is the Spiritist doctrine. All right, so it's a doctrine because it's more than one thing. It's not a philosophy, it's not a science, it's not a religion. It's the three things, at least. So, and really, you know, we look at Allan Kardec's works to give us that perspective. So there is a very strong aspect of science to Spiritism because Kardec was a scientist himself. And it is scientific in the context that it invites us to reason at every step. Kardec was the first one to say, if there's anything in the doctrine that does not make sense, or if there's any truth that will come and make some of the things I'm saying invalid, go with the truth. It's written in the works of Allan Kardec. He never said, I have the truth. He explained how he came up with the Spiritist doctrine, and he said, I may be wrong, because I'm a man, I've been interpreting the knowledge that I've been given by the Spirit. I may have made mistakes. So if you see anything that you don't believe makes sense, or if someone in the future proves that that particular point was incorrect, go with the truth. So I don't think any religion, philosophy, or science can be so open and so logical in accepting that reason itself has to guide us as we learn about Spiritism. It teaches us about cause and effect, which is a fundamental principle of science. And Kardec was very methodical. If you remember, if you read or if you haven't read, Kardec used a very methodical scientific approach to how he compiled the spiritual teachings, right? He used what he called the universal control method, which is he would send the same question to multiple mediums in multiple centers, and unless the vast majority of the answers he got were about the same, he would not accept that answer as being valid. So I don't think anything could get more scientific than that, you know, 150 years or 60 years ago when he started working on this. It's a philosophy for sure, because it outlines a series of principles that we can understand and adopt to our lives. So anything that gives you a set of principles that you can go by can be considered a philosophy, and Spiritism clearly is one. And it analyzes, it examines the fundamental questions in life. It goes back to the, you know, basic questions. Where do we come from? You know, where are we going to? And who are we? And obviously, it gives us a very strong foundation in terms of the laws, the natural laws, the moral aspects of our lives. And it's not moral in the sense of punishment, it's moral in the sense of here are the truths, right? The spiritual truths behind this that come from the natural law, the law of God, that could be a guide to our behavior. And these three elements are basically all founded, right, in what Kardec calls the natural laws, which is the set of laws that were unveiled or revealed by the spirits, you know, in the works of the codification. So that expands what we consider to be, you know, our physical laws into natural laws, the law of progress, right, the law of destruction, the law of love, charity, and justice. I mean, all those laws that explain how the spiritual and material world really work. And again, throughout that, Kardec give us a couple maxims that basically summarize, you know, many of those fundamental aspects. For example, reincarnation, right? To be born, to die, and to be reborn yet again, and constantly progressing. That's the law. So the law is a law of progress, and reincarnation is part of the law of progress because it allows us to continue. And it talks about unshakable faith, which is the only one that can meet reason face to face in every human epoch. Very interesting, because normally one would think that faith does not go along with reason, right? And people say, well, you have to believe, and then you don't have to think. And Kardec goes the other way, and he says it has to be reasoned faith, and that reasoned faith is unshakable. Because not only you know and you understand, but if your logic, if your reason can accept it, then nothing can stand in the way. That is true, unshakable faith. And that's what we get when we start to learn Spiritism and the laws that it reveals to us, and we bring that into our lives. So let me go through, again, a few, and I'm not going to read every word here. I'm just going to highlight those 34 principles, just to, again, remind us and allow us to go through the principles of Spiritism so that we can be reminded. Hopefully we can reflect, and we can then, you know, understand and ask ourselves, you know, how much have we come along in this journey? How much more do we need to study? And hopefully that becomes another incentive for us to not only continue studying, working on our development, but also be slightly better prepared, right? When we have to have a conversation with our family members, friends, co-workers, anyone who comes to us and wants to know a little bit more about Spiritism. So it starts with the principle that, you know, God is the source of everything. God is this force, energy, whatever you want to call, that is the cause, the primary cause of everything. Everything exists because of God. And we learn that is eternal, immutable. Immutable. That's very important. It doesn't change. It does not get adjusted. It doesn't like me more than like Ivan, right? It likes us both the same. It likes all of us the same. So it's immutable. So if we have a perception that sometimes God can be capricious, well, that's our very imperfect understanding of God. God cannot be capricious. God cannot have preferences. His laws are perfect, immutable, and applicable everywhere. So it's how we react and interact with that law that changes. God is unique, all-powerful, sovereignly just and good. Therefore, he has created the universe, and the universe is composed of two things, right? The visible or corporeal world, or we call material world, and the world of the spirits. Those are two different things, right? We learned that those are two different natures, the material nature and the spiritual nature. They coexist, they live together, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And we also learned that the spiritual world is the real world. The spiritual world is where we come from, and is the matrix, if you will. That's where everything started. The material world is secondary, right? It has a purpose, and we, on a temporary basis, come to this world to incarnate, to learn, to expiate, to go to trials, but eventually you come back to the real world, which is the spiritual world. Now, when we are here, we have a dense lenses. It's as if we were using very thick, glasses, which are the material lenses, and they make us see the material world very clearly, and it kind of blurs a little bit of our spiritual nature. But we are going to see here too that we have a dual nature as incarnates on earth. So it's just that we are a little blurred when we try to see and perceive the material world, just because when we are incarnated, the lenses that we put on are material lenses, and they make the material world extremely clear and the spiritual world slightly different for us to perceive. When we go back to the spiritual world, which is the original one, we see everything very clear. We see both the material world and the spiritual world with great, great clarity. So, also the spirits tell us that God has chosen humans to be the species where spirits would incarnate when they have to incarnate. So there were many questions, right? We see movies, we see books, we see religions who either believe that we can incarnate as animals, for example, or that we can become extraterrestrial, ETs, right? That's what you get when you're Brazilian and trying to speak English, right? So, you become an extraterrestrial. And that's something of a different nature. Well, the spirits are very clear. The only species where spirits incarnate are humans. Now, there could be and probably are different types of humans depending on the worlds that this humanity exists. And the spirits also tell us that humanity adjusts to that particular set of conditions, right? There may be some worlds out there which have more or less oxygen, more or less light, and therefore the humans in that world will look like ETs for us, but they are still part of the same humanity, and that's what the spirits tell us. Now, interesting concept then the spirits introduce to us is that there are three elements when we are incarnated. There's the soul, and the soul is the essence, is the intellectual or intelligent principle, is the true pure nature of our spirit. Now, it's very hard to even conceive that. It's like as if we were some sort of spark or light or little smoke. And we are encapsulated by the perispirit. Now, the perispirit is material. Don't get me wrong. It's absolutely material. And it's this intermediate layer between the physical body and the spirit, right? So if this would be the spirit and this would be the body, there is a layer in between, which is the perispirit. Sometimes it's difficult to understand, but we are not the first ones to allude to this energetic body, right? We hear about the astral body or aura, or other, cultures and religions call it different things, but we are all talking about this intermediate layer, which is material, but is very, very ethereal as matter. So it's very fine matter. But it's very important because it connects us, it connects our spirit with the physical world. Therefore, as we have those three elements, we have two natures, and we forget about that. Our two natures is we are at the same time spiritual and material. Our physical body is a permanent element of, not permanent because it perishes, but is an element of the material world while we are incarnated. And that's how we interact with the material world. We feel, we see, we smell. The spiritual, the spirit is part of the spiritual world. So we are spirits at the same time. We are living in the spiritual world. I mean, that's, sometimes we forget about this. We continue to live in the spiritual world. Now, and the connection between the two, the linkage is made through the perispirit. Now, as I said, while we are incarnated, because we have these thick material lenses on, it's hard for us to perceive. We can see the material world much easier than we can see, or much more easily than we can see the spiritual world. But we are still spiritual beings while incarnated. And that's true because, I mean, how many of us, and the reason why, the fact that we are here tells me that, no, obviously all of you here have somewhat of a belief, more or less strong, that there's something out there, right? That you perceive something, and most likely many of you have had that perception, whether it is what we call intuition, whether you've heard something, you've saw something, you had a dream, whether there was a communication made to you through a medium. Whatever the case might be, we know, we perceive, we feel the spiritual world. It's a little bit difficult because of the material layer that there is in between. But it's very important to remember that we are dual natured, right? As human beings. And that spiritual nature remains active. It's just a little hard for us to enable that perception. So we talk about, I already talked about this, the perispirit. Again, it's the semi-material envelope, but it's material. And because the perispirit is material, it can become visible, it can become touchable, right? How many of you have read, seen, heard about Sir William Crookes? A few people nodding, say I've heard about Sir William Crookes. And Sir William Crookes was mostly active and known between 1870 and 1874. He was a renowned scientist and researcher in the UK. I'm not going to name all of his, all the things he did for which he became famous for, but he was renowned, he was known, he was very highly regarded, as a researcher. And again, he was a prominent scientist, physicist, and chemist. And during that period, he became interested in a physical manifestation of spirits because he thought it was fake. He thought it was a farce. He thought he would be able to, like Haddad, he would be able to expose the fraud, and instead he converted himself because he found that it was not a fraud. So by researching, he saw that it was real, and he said, oh my goodness, so now I have to analyze this a little bit more. And as he did that, he at that point had the opportunity to work with some mediums, and one of the mediums, I think it's Jane Cook, then was a medium that had the ability to land ectoplasm, and then this spirit then came and started to manifest herself. I think it's Katie. Oh my goodness, Katie, I can't remember her last name, but it was the spirit who, during 3 years, manifested herself physically, right, to the audience. So she could be seen, she could be touched, and that's not something that's spooky for us. It is part of what Spiritism tells us. So the perispirit can become visible because it is matter. Now, we know that this no longer happens that easily. Do you know why it doesn't happen that easily these days? Anyone?
They don't have to prove it.
Well, so one, as you're saying, there's no more use for that. There are better uses for material manifestations, right? We don't need to see to believe, although some people would say, oh, I would love to see that, right? But their first reaction would probably be the same one that everybody else had. Oh, it is a fraud. That's the funny thing. Every apparition that has happened throughout history, everyone, whether it is with Francisco Cândido Xavier, because he was involved with materializations very early in his career, and Emmanuel told him, don't waste your time with this because it's not going to go anywhere. Whether it was William Crookes, whether it was any of the other researchers who were involved with this, the same thing happens. They the poor guys try and spend a lot of time trying to prove that it is real, and they can prove it's real, but still no one believes it, right? So they still go on, and still people say, oh, it's a fraud. I mean, if you go to the internet today and you research the apparitions that Francisco Cândido Xavier was involved with, you're going to find more pages trying to debunk him and tell us that it was a fraud than any good, useful material that can come out of that conversation. There's nothing useful that comes out of that, interesting enough. Now, the physical reason why this no longer happens is because, and the spirits had explained this, that mediums who had the ability to donate ectoplasm, which is necessary for this to happen, would no longer incarnate. So the types of mediums that would incarnate moving forward would be mediums that could be, that had the ability to write or to speak, right? That the spirits could write through, the spirits could speak through, but not the type of material effects. Because of what I just said, is really not useful. At the end of the day, all you're left with is doubt. So it doesn't really prove anything because no one believes. So it's interesting. Everybody wants to see to believe, but when you see, you're still not convinced. So, you know, it doesn't really help, right? It's like people saying, yes, please.
Is that the same thing that happened in the apparition of Jesus to many people? Was it very similar?
We can, yes, we can say that is the same, is very similar. I mean, if not the same thing, right? I mean, we have to believe, first of all, that obviously Jesus' perispirit was very different than our perispirit, but there's some accounts that say that even his perispirit had to be transformed for him to be able to come to earth. And then I believe, yes, that it was through his perispirit that everybody could see him, because otherwise, if it's not material, we cannot see it, right? That's a little problem we have. While incarnated, we can only see things which are material. So if we could see it, yes, I would say yes. Okay, so the other interesting concept that we learn, and this starts to highlight a very, very important aspect of Spiritism, and David alluded to it when he was giving the introduction, is the aspect of consolation. Spiritism is above anything else a doctrine of consolation. It's not a doctrine of salvation. Right? Salvation is that doctrine that says all you have to do is believe, or if you don't come through me or through my church, you're not going to be saved. You're never going to hear either thing in Spiritism. Believing is just the beginning. There's a little bit of hard work involved. It can take a few centuries. Right? And then you're saved. Absolutely. Right? If you just work hard enough, long enough, you'll be saved. The other thing is, believing or you don't have to come through Spiritism. Spiritism is just one more way, right? There are fantastic, admirable examples of really, really good spirits that came in every single church out there. I mean, they don't have to be Spiritists, right? It can be anyone on this earth, any spirit that finally gets the message and then dedicates themselves to helping themselves and others progress. So it doesn't have to be through one or another religion. So Spiritism, what is different about Spiritism is the aspect of consolation. It consoles us because it comes to tell us that we are not condemned forever, that our sins are not final, that and they can be pardoned through our own effort. So that consolation that tells us that we are not alone, that tells us that we are going to meet again, right? Those who have been with us and those who we have never met in this life, we'll be with them again when we all return to the spiritual world, that we are going to have another chance and another chance and another chance to come and work, that we don't have to panic, that a lot of the sorrows, a lot of the difficulties that we create in life come from the belief that it's here now and I'm better than you and this people are better than that people, so they can oppress the other people. I am chosen, you are not chosen. A lot of that comes from that behavior. Once we understand that we are all marching along the same journey, things become a lot simpler, easier, and we calm down, gives us more time, gives us perspective. We start looking at each other as true brothers and sisters, and we understand that we are all here on the same boat, truly. So that said, we also learned that there are different categories of worlds and spirits, right? And we learned that there are, roughly speaking, 5 categories of worlds, from the primitive to the test and autonomous, which is ours right now, through the regenerating, which is, as we are told, that's what we are becoming. It's very good news. We are turning into a world of regeneration. To the next stage, which is the blessed worlds, where evil is inexistent, through the celestial worlds where the pure spirits inhabit, and I have to believe that's where Jesus, for example, inhabits, right? And the good news is we are not stationary. We cannot stay in the same order forever. That's the law of progress that compels us to move forward. It also tells us that, as I said, that once we leave this world, we go back to the spiritual world. And, just to make it simple to imagine, the easiest way for me is to always think about No Solar, because it's the only movie I've seen that shows us going back to the spiritual world. I know there probably are many different stations or worlds when we come back. Of course, we know there's Umbral, but I think it's the best representation. I don't know if everyone has seen the movie, if you've seen this picture here. Right, the city with all its different departments. And we talked about almost everything there. So the other thing we learn again is that upon discarnation, upon returning to the spiritual world, there's one thing that is absolutely certain, is that we are going to be greeted by those that are part of our spiritual family. And I don't think there's anything that can be more consoling than that we're not going to go into a black hole, that we're not going to disappear, that we're not going to go into a place that's scary and we're going to find people that we don't know. Many of the accounts of this, of course, some spirits go through a period of turbulence, we know that, right? And we go because of our own deeds. But that period of turbulence also has an end, right? It's not infinite. And so sooner or later, we are going to come and realize that we are surrounded by those that love us, those who are part of a spiritual family, those who have been supporting us through the time when we've been incarnated, and that are there to receive us. And again, that thought is extremely consoling, because we know we're not going to be alone, right? And we are not alone. The other important realization of Spiritism is the constant influence of spirits. Because we are in this dual world where we are material and spiritual at the same time, we are under constant influence of the Spirit, and we don't always realize that. But as the Spirit tells us, this happens much more often than we can think. We are constantly under that influence. There's good news and bad news, right? The good news is we can be under the influence of the good spirits if we so choose, if we so wish, if our effort and will takes us into that level of connection. And we all have our own spiritual guardian, whatever we call it, mentor, guide, and they are dedicated to us, and they are there to help us every step of the way. But at the same time, we, given our state of mind, state of feelings, sometimes we, through the law of affinity, we end up attracting those who feel the same way, and that type of influence sometimes is not very good. And that troubles us, and that causes us to be disturbed, depressed, with feeling powerless, helpless. And that's when we have to remember that the good spirits are there. What we also learn is that when good spirits are around us, the bad spirits leave. Right? It's just how it works, because they don't like to be close to good spirits. Sometimes we go to a place, to a meeting, to a party, and sometimes we don't feel very good, right? We feel, you know, the environment is a little heavy, we say. That's probably because, and we leave, right? I wonder that sometimes good spirits come to our house and they leave because they say, well, I don't like the environment here. That must be sad. But the reality is that if we cultivate an environment of peace, of love, of elevated thoughts, that will more likely than not attract good spirits. And by definition, having the presence of the good spirits drives the spirits who are suffering away. Oftentimes, actually, they get rescued, which is another very consoling thought. You're not just repelling them and telling them, no, don't be here. You are actually giving them an opportunity to be rescued, right, from that suffering, from that despair. So then we learn that it's possible to communicate with spirits, which is real. Some of you may have experienced that. I have. I grew up in a Spiritist family that had a lot of opportunity to try some of these principles, right? Because I think there was a lot of disturbance in my home because, I don't know why, I have a clue, maybe because we had past debts. And those past debts kind of haunted us in trying to really disturb and cause imbalance in our family. So when I grew up was, I would say, we had very happy moments, but we had moments of struggle where very clearly we felt the presence of, you know, sentiments and feelings and forces that if we did nothing about would probably have destroyed the family. That was very obvious, right? So being Spiritist, we took the Spiritist approach, right? And through a lot of prayer, a lot of charity, a lot of, you know, soul searching and finding, we renewed our strength and our faith and our courage, right, to continue battling and improving our lives so that that would not cause our family to be destroyed. So this is to illustrate that you have both a ostensible and occult type of communication. So ostensible is you go to a Spiritist meeting, a mediumship meeting, and you see a medium talking, you see a medium writing, and that's ostensible. The occult is the more dangerous one, is when we are being influenced day in and day out by ideas from spirits, and we are without noticing. And that is the part that we have to pay attention to. That's why we say orar and vigiar in Portuguese, pray and I don't know how, and watch, pray and watch, thank you. And then we talked about the law of affinity. Again, that's something that governs the relationship with the spirits. We are attracted to those spirits who think and feel the way we do, and that means we can change if we want, right? So it's all about you know, what we are, where we want to be mentally. Our mental home determines our mental family. You know, which spirits do we gather with? When it comes to understanding, am I surrounded by good spirits? Or if I am in a mediumship session and a spirit manifests itself, either they say something or they write something, how do I know that that spirit is a good spirit? And Kardec gave us a very simple rule. It's how they communicate, is their language. The language tells you everything. A good, elevated spirit will use nothing but elevated language. They will only convey messages that influence, that you know, drive you know, harmony, peace, that drive unity. So if at any moment in our lives, within the center or outside, there is any trace of preference and say, oh, what you're doing is good, what that other group is doing is not good. If something like that ever happens, you can be 100% assured that that spirit is not a good spirit. No good spirit will want to drive dissension in any way. there's no use for that. Even if there's something going wrong, and even if there is a person, a group, something that is threatening the good work that another group is doing, the good spirits will never say, get away from this group. They will say, look at this direction. This is the better direction for you to go. They will never tell you, to create harm or dissension with another person. So this is very subtle, but very different. And this is where we learn how to pay attention to those messages. And that's the same within our head. We have to think about what type of messages are we getting from the spiritual world. If we're getting messages that are pointing us in a more productive way, you can bet that this is a message from a good spirit. If there is any trace, again, of dissension and creating, little issues with other people, believe me, that's not how the good spirits work. I mean, no one wins with that type of behavior. And finally, what are the golden rules? What is that the spirits teach us? And they don't teach us anything new that the Christ has not taught us already. They just expand upon what Jesus has taught us. And Kardec says it can all be summarized into this rule. Do unto others as you would that others should do unto you. That's the golden rule. And they go on to explain more. Why is that? They explain the law of action and reaction. They explain to us all of the natural laws, the law of progress, destruction, social laws. I mean, they explain all of it. Why is that? They expand upon this with more and more examples. But it's nothing different than what Christ has taught us. And they teach us that we are what we are. We bring with us to the spiritual world what we have cultivated inside of us. Nothing can be hidden in the spiritual world. We are transparent, whether that's good or not. It's a fact. So when we go to the spiritual world, we are transparent. Spirits can see through us. They can see who we are, what we've done. There's nothing to be hidden. You cannot pretend you have a title or knowledge or behavior that you actually don't have. So think about that. I always think about this. I think, what if I discarnated today? Not that I want to, but what if I discarnated tomorrow? Am I ready? How would I be seen? How would I be received? Would I be ashamed of myself? Well, there's nothing wrong about being ashamed of yourself, other than probably that's not what we want, right? We don't want to be ashamed of ourselves. I mean, you probably want to feel that you are, even if you're not perfect. And being ashamed of yourself and being perfect, I mean, those are two different things. You don't have to be perfect to not be ashamed. As long as you know who you are and you know that you are working towards perfecting your imperfections, I think we all would feel very good about that. And there's nothing wrong with showing ourselves exactly like that. I know who I am. I know that I have imperfections, that I have still to work. That's who I am. There's nothing to be ashamed of in this case. I'm not pretending. And finally, the final principle, again, which is extremely consoling, and this is what I found to be unique about Spiritism, what drew me to Spiritism, and what is helpful to other people. Whenever you see someone suffering, right? It's interesting to talk about the fact that you can communicate with spirits. It's interesting to talk about the fact that there's different classes of world, but what really makes a difference is our ability to console them, to use Spiritism to console them, to somehow help them, and if possible, if appropriate, introduce the concept that after suffering comes redemption. Right? That suffering has a reason, that we can help each other, and that no suffering and no sin is unpardonable, as Kardec says here. That there's nothing that we've done wrong that cannot be made right through our own efforts. And again, I don't think there's anything more consoling than that concept. And finally, what the works of Kardec bring to us is a revival of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It does not change anything. It augments, it expands upon what Jesus has taught us. And what Jesus has taught us, if you think about it for a second, the unique teachings of Jesus are around fraternity. It's the concept of fraternity, which was not very well understood and practiced at the time that Jesus came to this earth. Lending someone a hand, helping someone who was deemed an outcast of society. And believe me, at that point, we were very good at labeling different types of outcasts, right? They could be prostitutes, they could be thieves, they could be people with lepers, they could be, I mean, we were fantastic. We could find, you know, so many categories of people that should be outcast. I mean, there was just a few chosen ones. And Jesus comes to this mass of people who are deemed to be outcasts, the ones who were not chosen, the ones who were, you know, excluded from society. And he says, I'm here to talk to you. I'm not talking to the doctors of the law. I'm talking to you. And here's the message that I'm telling you. You are the chosen ones. You are the ones who are going to see my Father. You know, so then he goes through, you know, the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes, and he explains that those who suffer, those who are meek, those who are, you know, humble, those who fight for justice, those are the ones who are going to inherit the kingdom of God. And that is, again, Spiritism expands upon that and explains through logic and reason and examples, through the explanation of the natural laws that we learn in all of the Spiritist books. Why is that? So that gives us even more intelligence, better means to understand and to apply that to ourselves. So with that, thank you. We have